Hi, welcome to Node 4's webinar. My name is John Williams. I'm Senior Product Manager for Node 4, and I'm sitting here with Vicky Withy, who is our Compliance Manager and expert on all things GDPR. So hopefully you can all see and hear this, and if you have any questions, there's a Q&A toolbar that you can put your questions in and we'll address them at the end. So this presentation is primarily about, hang on a second, there we go. It's going to provide an insight into some of those articles which pertain to data security. Obviously there are a lot of GDPR articles, but there are a few that we've pulled out which pertain particularly to the way you manage data and the rules and the way that you should be the way that you should be looking at managing data. And we're also going to illustrate some data breaches that have happened in the UK over the last few months and talk about how we would, in retrospect, of cure those or prevent them from happening and what the issues should be. Everybody hopefully can see that link there that they can link to our GDPR guide that we've recently published. And if you haven't linked to it, then you can do so after the webinar, or we'll be in contact with you to provide you with a hard copy of that, should you want to. Okay, so let me ask, first of all, Vicky, would you like to go through what GDPR aims are?
Okay, so GDPR really is about strengthening data protection data protection law. Currently got Data Protection Act of 1988, and really it's not doing the job which it's supposed to do, which is protect people's personal information. Organisations out there have been very heavily criticised for abusing their rights on using too much personal data. So GDPR really brings in a new set of rules and regulations which all companies out there have to comply to protect personal identifiable information. If you don't know already, or your customers don't know, it is the UK Supervisory Authority, the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, who's actually overseeing all of this across the UK. So GDPR, like I said, is about protecting the rights and freedoms of natural persons, of individuals. We are individuals. We are also known in legal terms as data subjects. And like I say, we have rights under GDPR, of which I'll come to explain very shortly. But really, this is about also placing organisations duties upon them to ensure that they actually do protect people's data. And you can do this, or our customers can do this in many ways. One of them is to have a data protection impact assessment where they find out where that information is within their organisation, understand the risks around having that information in their business, and try and put the right security level mechanisms in place, or security solutions to prevent data leakage and data breaches. You obviously need to have in place processes around breach reporting, and also there needs to be acknowledgement of the fines that are out there as well, which I think are pretty well publicised now. The next page isn't now showing, but anyway, there's 8 basic rights which individuals have above and beyond what is currently in the Data Protection Data Protection Act. So one is the right to have access to people's their own information. You can have the right to have your information rectified. So if it's incorrect, you can have it updated. Change of name or where you live. The right to erasure can sometimes also apply. So if you don't want organisations to have your information anymore, obviously you can ask potentially for that information be removed, providing that organisation doesn't have a legitimate concern to keep that information, a contractual obligation in place. You can ask for your data to be stopped actually being processed, or you can have data portability, or have the right to object, or even the right to have automation decisions overturned, where, for example, you might have a credit check in place and you don't want, you disagree with the outcome of that credit check, decision, and you can actually go back to the organisation and actually ask them to review that information with the new information that you might have to support that evidence and support to say actually that automated decision is actually wrong. Also under GDPR, there are now going to be 6 basic accounting principles rather than the 8 that we currently have under the Data Protection Act. And these 6 are really broken down into really the purpose and limitation of holding that information, data minimisation, accuracy of data, storage and limitation, how long you can keep that information for, integrity, confidentiality, and also availability of that information, you know, that you meet, again, it comes back to securing that data, and lawfulness and fairness and transparency of information. So you must tell your data subjects, our customers and your customers, must tell their end person whose personal identifiable information they have hold of within their company, how they're going to look after all of their personal data and their information. So I'm briefly going to give you 3 examples of articles that actually talk about specifically around security under GDPR, and I'm just going to give you the highlights of them because they're all quite lengthy articles. Article 25 is really about data protection by design and by default. Now, data protection by design is all about understanding that the data controller has to implement technical and organisational measures to ensure that they're going to protect personal information. So you have to consider it. So you have to understand what are you protecting and also how are you going to do this. So you need to, you know, give confidence to your customers when talking to them about GDPR and their solutions around this, about technical solutions and services that might be on offer either through Node 4 or through your other partners and yourselves. So, you know, Article 25 is important to note. Article 32 is a very lengthy article. It's all about the security of processing information. And this is broken down into 5 more simple steps. The first one is about how you should implement appropriate technical measures to ensure there is a level of security. You need to ensure that there is confidentiality, integrity and availability, so making sure that those who have access to information have the right access and those who don't need it shouldn't have it. That there has to be accidental and lawful destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorised disclosure of, or access to personal data transmitted, stored, or otherwise processed, also considered. There has to be a process for regularly testing, assessing and evaluating the effectiveness of technical and organisational measures for ensuring the security of the processing. And there has the ability also to restore in the event of a physical or technical incident, such like the WannaCry and DDoS attacks that are out there that your customers may be experiencing from time to time. You know, the ability to back up and restore so that they can go back to where they were before they had this attack is you know, absolutely imperatively important. So that's Article 32, and then the final article that I want to highlight that is around security is about really the notification of personal data breaches to the supervisory authority, which is the ICO. Under the new regulations now, we're only going to have 72 hours of which when an actual breach actually occurs that you're able to report it. This is going to have massive implications on businesses because usually most attacks or anything that usually happens, it happens usually on a Friday evening or a weekend or at vulnerable times like bank holidays and other annual holidays. If somebody's going to do something naughty, that's when it's going to usually happen. So the processor or data controller has to notify without undue delay when they become aware of a data breach. So for us as Node 4, we are a data processor, so we look after customers' information, and we, you know, if we become aware of a data breach at any point, you know, it's our responsibility to inform the data controller as much as it is also the customer's responsibility as the data controller to inform us should also they have a data breach themselves. And within this, Article 33 is really all about when a data breach occurs, that they have in place, you're able to describe, or the customer is able to describe, the measures that they've taken to protect personal data. And I think it's all about mitigation of risk. If you've taken out the right security measures to protect personal information, therefore you've done everything you can to mitigate the risk of such a data breach, in which case, you know, hopefully the ICO will look more favourably upon you and won't be issuing with large fines.
Yeah, so I think that's the key thing that I think I want to reiterate here, is that GDPR is not something that you're going to be get an audit from the government and get a tick box to say you've passed. This is all about individual organisations understanding what their risks are and where their data is kept, and putting the right things in place in order to mitigate against losing that data. So it's taking the reasonable steps dependent on what the risk is. Now obviously that risk is going to vary throughout a whole bunch of customers because of the businesses that they're in, etc. So there is no one stop solution to this. It is going to be very much down to what the risk is. So, you know, we need to understand what we are protecting in order to understand what we need to be putting into place. Do we need all the data that we have? You know, is it all relevant? As the GDPR regulations say, it's got to be relevant, and it's got to be suitable. You know, we've got to tell people that's where we're holding it for those particular reasons, and we need to be considering what the risk is if there is a data breach. We need to have those processes in place. So Node 4 has processes in place. If we were to have a data breach, we have got a process that we will follow to inform the ICO and to inform our customers. So it's, you know, there's a lot of just internal processes that need to be thought about. Obviously, this webinar is particularly around what solutions there are, or how people can secure that data, what sort of things they should be considering. So what security do they have to protect that data in place? So there are sort of three key issues, as far as I can see, for GDPR data compliance that I've looked, and there's a lot of concerns. There was an Opus survey in January of this year that was commissioned by the Poneman Institute, and one of the big things that came out of this is that 70% of CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, are worried about the lack of competent in-house staff. Now, as resellers selling to customers, that is a big opportunity for you to be able to provide that expertise, either through using Node 4's services to promote them and white labelling our services, or having your own in-house services to be able to give that expertise in a way. So, you know, that is a real concern. 70% is you know, obviously a lot. There is a risk. There is lack of the risk visibility. So, you know, we talk about layered security. We talk about you know, having things in place that are going to be protecting us from that risk. But actually, how do we assess what the actual risk is? We have all these layers in place. What we actually need to do is understand what we're not seeing in terms of things going on in our network, to be able to say, right, well, there is a gap here in my layers. I need to either change my antivirus product, or I need to put a better one in, or antivirus is working fine, great, and this is ratified by having that risk visibility. And lastly, but by certainly no means least, a lot of breaches are caused by, you know, staff clicking on the wrong thing, opening up emails. So that's this lack of staff awareness. And again, this Opus survey in January of this year sort of highlighted that 65% of CISOs are worried that their employees will fall for some phishing scam or other, resulting in some credential theft or another. So whether they're linking to something that is getting some key logging type exploits, or whether they're downloading something that is then installing stuff on the network, you know, lack of staff awareness on what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing is quite key. So I want to sort of look at three examples really of the types of breaches and they're real examples. Clarksons in November of last year, they're a massive ship broker, one of the world's largest. They had a breach where an isolated user account got some unauthorized access, and data was leaked out. Now, this was of a very, very confidential nature of client data, and the person who exfiltrated it then came back to Clarksons and said, look, if you pay me a ransom for this, then we won't leak it out to the internet. So it's blackmail through ransoming of data, but not using ransomware, which is obviously data encryption. And they cost them a lot of money. They had an organisation called Camarco came in and did a whole PR job, and they contacted solicitors, and there was a whole lot of wheels turning in the background in order to manage this whole thing in a very public way. They had to make a statement to the stock exchange. Their share value fell 2%, which for the largest shipbroker in the world was probably quite a lot of money. But what were the issues here? So let me ask Vicky what the consequences would be in a GDPR environment that we would see today.
Okay, so if this breach occurred as of the 25th of May this year, you're looking at really potentially a 4% annual global turnover fine, because under the 6 accounting principles that the information that was breached wasn't processed in an appropriate manner to maintain security. I think it's also important to note that you could also apply fines via the ICO under Article 24 for the responsibility of the controller not actually protecting the data. Now, under the articles, of which there's 99 under GDPR, you can actually be fined up to 2% of annual global turnover, or up to 10 million euros. So, again, it's a substantial fine to any business. And also Article 32, again, not protecting personal identifiable information and having the appropriate level of security in place. And I think this is what Clarksons didn't have. They never considered that they might ever have a breach of any kind or be held to ransom, so they never secured their data.
Yes, well, I mean, the initial breach came from a user account that had either a brute force password attack so that they cracked that user account password, and then they got access. So they weren't aware of that. So that's the first thing that happened. They weren't aware that this was going on. So, how long did that take before they had the data leak? We don't know. They don't know, certainly, for sure. So how could they have prevented this? Well, if they'd have had some sort of SIEM service like our N4 Threat Detect, that would have spotted the brute force password attempts on the accounts and would have highlighted it before they would have got breached by the fact that these password attempts are going on. So obviously if a user tries to get into an account and they do a bad password, then 3 attempts isn't worth looking at. But if you get 100, 1,000 or 2,000 password attempts, and something's going on. So having visibility, this is what I'll go back to this before, about talking about visibility of the risk. By having this type of technology in place where you're seeing things going on before the horse has bolted out the stable door, then you're able to stop it. You're able to block that breach before it actually is going to be a breach. So what else could they have done? Well, they could have flagged that data with data leak prevention types of technology, and again, our M4 Protect next generation firewall has that kind of technology built into it, so they could have flagged that it wouldn't have left via the email system or the firewall type. It would have blocked it, and at a very simple level, of course, they could have encrypted it. Had they encrypted that data at rest, then they wouldn't have had been able to. If they'd have exfiltrated that data in an encrypted form, that wouldn't have been usable. So one of the other breaches that we're looking at here is the Bupa global breach. This happened in July of last year. These are all fairly recent. But this one, in terms of the breach, it was an insider breach. So So it was somebody who was working for the organisation in whatever role, we have no idea, but he decided, or she decided, that they were going to exfiltrate a whole load of customer information about health records, etc., etc. Now this was Bupa Global, so I know that Sheldon Kenton, the managing director of Bupa, did a video statement as well as reporting to the ICO that this wasn't going to affect UK customers. But in all, there was about 108,000 records leaked out. The vendor, somebody called Mozil, posted all these records on the Alphabay site on the dark web, advertising 1 million exclusive medical records. Obviously, that's still out there as such. And again, Vicky, what sort of penalties do you think that would have occurred around this?
Okay, so again, under Article 5, which again come back to the 6 accounting principles, looking at data processed in an appropriate manner to maintain security. Again, this hasn't really been considered, even though the breach is happening inside the organisation rather than somebody attacking from the outside. You could be fined potentially under Article 24 or also 32. Again, it's understanding that level of security that's required to protect personal information and to put those right controls in place or right security levels. So in particular, from accidental or unlawful loss is particularly highlighted in Article 32, and this is the perfect example of loss of information by an employee internally in a business.
Yes, and a lot of breaches are internal breaches. Either usually they are not malicious, they're by accident, negligent. There's a lower percentage that are actually malicious, but it does show that you can't just be focused on blocking your borders to stuff coming in. It has to be a comprehensive policy of security that is going to lock down your internal network to have the right people access the right data. And we don't know that the person who leaked this was the right person. So, if we talk about what the prevention things could have been, well, obviously the SEAM stuff would have helped with this. The data leak protection would have helped in terms of flagging data again that shouldn't be leaving the environment. And you can do that on endpoints as well with our M4 endpoint management system. And obviously we have database experts here who can offer advice on bolting down databases for their optimum, not only their optimum performance, but also who should be having access to it and removing rights and giving the right rights, the right level of access to the people and the systems that actually need it. And at the last level, of course, they could have encrypted it. Data encryption is key to this. So the last example I've got here is of business email compromise. So the UK is one of the top 5 countries in the world for business email compromise type of security breaches. This is not a measure of the attack success, but really just a measure of the number of attempts that happen in the UK and the other top 4 countries as well. So there was, back in September of last year, a number of Mayfair art dealers who got stung by having their email accounts hacked or breached. People sitting in those email accounts unbeknownst to the people who own them and leaking, forwarding messages until they saw the right sort of message that they needed to get and intercept it and substitute it with something else. So what they actually substituted, Laura Bartlett, for instance, her gallery made a major sale that would have set her up for the rest of the year. That email that sent the invoice to the customer was intercepted by the hackers, and the details of the banking details for where the money should be paid was substituted by their own. So when she, saying, why haven't you paid this bill, and the purchaser rather says, well, I have, she realised that something was wrong. So again, this was one of at least 9 Mayfair art dealers that were breached in this way. And again, the hack was quite simple. Get into somebody's email account and sit there forwarding emails to somewhere else until you start to see the right things coming out, and then you can intercept them and send some details through and substitute your own banking details. So again, Vicky, what sort of breaches, penalties are you going to bring?
There'll be a common theme here because, again, you go back to Article 5 under the 6 accounting principles, and again, it's about processing data to maintain security at the end of the day. So potentially, despite the fact that this gallery has gone out of business, but
Absolutely.
she could have been fined under GDPR potentially 4% of annual global turnover. Also, Article 25, which would be a top level fine of 2% of global turnover for the controller not implementing the appropriate technical measures required. So, we all think about doing business, or our customers think about doing business continuity, and they think about, being flooded or a plane landing on their building and not being able to work from their head office anymore. But what they don't think about is sometimes what can take out their business in a scenario like this, where, like I say, business email has been compromised. So the fact that wasn't ever considered, and she never considered that thought, she could have been open to such a fine. And Article 32 as well, again, is about understanding and evaluating the security measures taken to protect personal identifiable information, such as cardholder details.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what could she have done? A very small business. Well, she could have put some form of two-factor authentication in for passwords to emails, so that not reliant wholly upon a password. She should have, make sure that passwords are suitable, and if she's storing passwords, then she should be encrypting those passwords and salting them with random data so that they can't be looked at. But so two-factor authentication, I say, would have been probably a good thing for her to have looked at. So I've tried to sort of get a feel on 3 steps that will sort of help most in terms of looking towards how you're going to achieve sort of GDPR compliance, really. And I guess what the first step is, that understanding of what you're protecting and is it working, and what are the gaps. So the first thing on my list here is a vulnerability test of some sort, either an internal one or an external one, depending upon whether you want to test your internal network or whether you've got websites or things that are public facing that you want to test. A vulnerability test will actually give you a quick look at what holes there are, and what parts of this layered security that you have that are working and are not working. It may just be a validation that all this is working, and great, thumbs up. It may highlight some holes that you need to fill. So and around sort of putting policies in place, some form of unified threat management. We all have multiple platforms now. We've got virtual machines sitting in our offices, or we've got public cloud, or we've got hybrid cloud, we've got a bit of Azure, we've got a bit of AWS, etc. Having a unified security policy that we can actually put out to all of these, rather than little bits here, little bits there, and being able to see that is very, very key. And one of the things I'm very, very keen on here is some sort of recurring SIEM reporting. So this is security incident event management, where you're actually doing a constant risk analysis of all the things that are going on in your network, so that when a piece of code arrives that looks a bit weird and starts doing weird and wonderful things, you are alerted to that, and it gives you a risk analysis of that and tells you exactly how you should be responding to it, and tells you whether your system is patched and all the rest of it. So that type of technology is very, very good. And our M4 Threat Detect is the system that we're using for that. So if I just put up here what our solutions are, now obviously as resellers, these are available to you to white label if you want to put your own branding and things around it. But we're obviously have a security operations centre here in Nottingham, where our security team are providing these services on a constant basis to our customers and your customers as well. So if you've got any questions, use the Q&A bar to come up with that. We've got some further information. That booklet is a great booklet, and I would urge you to download it, or we'll be in contact with you and we'll give you a hard copy if you want to. And we're offering to our partners that we can do a £750 voucher for a pen test. We'd like to limit those to one per reseller, but you might want to do it internally on your own systems, or you may have a customer that has inquired about doing some sort of vulnerability testing, and you might want to use this in order to get some bring those guys in some way. So, do we have any questions? Yeah, no. I can see one there. Is that...
Okay.
What's that?
Okay, so first one, what is good practice to help protect against passwords or passwords being infiltrated?
Yes, so that goes back to the gallery incident, I guess, where the passwords weren't protected properly. So some two-factor authentication is obviously a very good thing. So two-factor is about something you know and something you have. So you know the password, you have a phone, and when you want to log in, it will give you a one-time PIN in order to go in. So two-factor authentication is great. If you are going to store passwords, then you should be hashing them and salting them so that they're not visible if somebody does get into your system. We had a customer some time ago who, or not that long ago actually, who kept passwords in a file on the server marked passwords.txt. I mean, that's not the way to hold things.
Or passwords in plain text as well.
Absolutely.
It's not the greatest idea.
People should be imaginative about the way they create passwords. I always say you need to look around you in your situ and you use objects and you concatenate parts of those words into something that is unique, so that you can not something that is going to be able to have a dictionary thrown against it in order for password cracking. Okay, we've got another one here. So I've got a question here. What security solutions best fit my business?
Okay, so first of all, I think to help identify what your customers are looking for, they need to first of all understand where their personal identifiable data is in their business. They need to do some sort of data mapping exercise, and I think once somebody's mapped out what information they've got and what departments and where this information is, they're holding it in what systems, then it becomes a bit easier to then kind of understand, well, what would be the risk of losing this information, and what would the scenario be if somebody accidentally emailed this out to somebody, or somebody happened to attack our systems and get hold of this information. So then you can start to really pull out the different security solutions around protecting information. So I think understanding the risk, mitigating that risk is really important, and the beginning of that process is understanding where your information is.
Absolutely, and you may have different departments have different access to different information. So HR department and the finance department. So you wouldn't want finance looking into HR. You wouldn't want HR looking into finance. So what we call containerization, where you've got firewalls that manage east-west traffic that stop the bleed of data going. So the network shouldn't be a big pot of information that everybody can get access to. It should be containerized into logical areas that are shielded from each other, so that the right people have right access to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you very much. If there's no more questions coming in, and just a couple of seconds, I don't think there's anything more, then thank you very much for listening to our webinar, and hopefully you'll be getting back to us soon to expand upon the opportunities that we can do through this GDPR compliance. Thank you.
Thank you.